Hi and welcome back to Warp Things. My name is Otso. This is Ostromandeus and his pals. That's what we're gonna paint today. Today I really want to practice how to paint non-metallic metal because that's something I think is one of the coolest effects you can pull off when painting miniatures, and that's something I really don't know how to do. I have painted non-metallic metal once before on good old Techlist in an old video of mine, but that's the only time, and that was like 2 years ago, and it was so hard that I never tried it again. So this whole project's gonna be me force practicing it until I feel comfortable with it. I won't go into too much detail on how I paint the non-metallic metals. It was mostly just trial and error until I had something I was happy with. But I'm still gonna show you the main points and just pretend that I didn't spend weeks on the metals. And I think it really pays off in the end, so let's get to it. My cat wanted to check the package for any heresy. None was detected, so I was free to open it. Inside we got 1 sprue, 3 bases and building instructions. I'll start with making the bases so that I can prime everything at the same time. Using my favorite basing material, 2mm cork gasket from my trusty hardware store. I tear a piece, roughly the shape of the base, and then rip the excess off with my fingers. The uneven edge looks like stone flooring and will take washes and dry brushing like a charm. I glued it down with super glue. I'm making a second layer of cork pieces on top to add height and interest to the bases. I rip some pieces apart and glue them next to each other, but with a slight gap so that it looks like the top layer is a cracked floor on top of the stone ground. The Inquisitor comes with a tactical rock. I usually don't use them, but this one gave me an idea. The piece that it comes with has an engraved skull with a chaos star around it. I wanted to make look like a bombing has torn the floor open, revealing a chaos ritual site. I snapped some pieces of the rock so that I can better hide it in between the rough cork pieces. I nipped the Inquisitor's legs and torso off the sprue, scraped the mold lines and glued them together. Now I can see how he'll fit on the base. Finally, I'll paint a small amount of texture paint all over so that I don't need to glue any sand on them. I make sure to keep the rim of the base clean. No one likes a dirty rim. The tactical rock that came with the box also has some smoke billowing out of the molded cracks. I glued them on too, in places that they seem to fit. I assembled the Servitor without any hiccups, of course getting rid of any mold lines in the process. And then I glued the Servo skull on its base. I am very happy about the fact that the Inquisitor's cape is a separate piece. I usually hate painting the underside of the capes, poking and prodding between the legs with a brush, anyway. I'll leave the cape just tacked on for priming for easier access later. I also blue tack his gun arm, head and the pelt on top of the cape. I like doing sub-assemblies for hard to reach areas. Some say that if a brush won't fit in between, it's not worth painting, but I'm somewhat of a perfectionist and unpainted armpits, necks, backs and cracks give me anxiety. Blue tacking everything in the right place will let me do a zenithal prime as it would be completely assembled. That means I can glue them on later seamlessly with plastic glue. With everything intact, I blue tacked the minis onto the sprue that they came with for priming. First a black prime to cover everything, then a showering of white from above to bring out the upwards facing parts. I almost always do a zenithal prime. It helps the eye easily figure out what is what compared to plain black. Light colors also cover much better on white than black. I removed the Inquisitor and the Servitor from their bases. I'll paint those first. I'll start by fixing the deepest crevices that the primer didn't reach with a dark grey paint. Then I overbrush all the stone with a light grey. I don't use a lot of speed paints on miniatures. I find them fiddly and always have a hard time getting the results I want with them. In basing, however, even coats don't matter, and I can get a lot of value with just 1 coat of speed paint. I use Basilicanum Grey. It's a nice and earthy grey. Did I mention it's grey? After it had dried, I picked out the red chaos symbols on the tactical rocks, and then a watered down shade of Agrax Earthshade for even more definition. Concrete, in my opinion, looks the best with a light beige highlight, so I dry brushed the bases with a light flesh color. I also quickly edge highlighted the most pronounced edges. Lastly, on the Inquisitor's base was the rising smoke effects. I base coated them white to get them as bright as possible. I heavily glazed yellow on the bottom for some still burning embers, and then I played around with the greys and blacks to make the smoke yucky and dark. Now onto the minis themselves. First on the chopping block is the Servo skull. Some poor guy had to donate his skull to float around as a glorified Bluetooth speaker. Painting skulls is fun. Dark brown base coat, everything except the gaps with off-white, some liquid talent, and then the raised parts again with off-white. I even gave a small white highlight to the brow. Skulls are really easy to get looking good with just a white base coat and Agrax shade, but I want to get it looking that 10% better. This way is also great practice for painting faces. The steps and scale are pretty similar. I started with the skull first, because the metallic parts are the smallest and I want the practice for the bigger models. I painted all the bronze parts dark brown, avoiding the deepest cracks. Then I sketched out some highlights with a lighter brown, where I thought that they would make sense, trying hard to summon all the theory back into my head from all the YouTube videos I've watched about NMM along the years. Then I enforced the highlights and edge highlighted mostly everything with a yellow brown. As a dessert, I painted small dots in the back of the head and the Inquisitorial symbol in the front with red. Now the steel. I don't want it just to look like shiny concrete, so for the middle color I chose Incubi Darkness, a very dark but saturated blue-green. Black for the shadows and my lightest gray for highlights. I used only these three colors and did the same as in the bronze parts. I mixed them around for different values. When I had the highlights figured out, I blacklighted everything with a thin black paint and gave a final highlight with pure white. Getting all the metals done on the smallest mini of the bunch was a nice confidence boost for the bigger challenges later. For me, small victories are important on a big project. This is STENTOR-I-52. He is Ostromandeus' Vox Servitor, and Ostromandeus basically uses him as an automatic preacher of sort. I read that Ostromandeus was fighting cultists in a planet called Kaldasa, and together with his crew he snuck into Kaldasa's Vox fortress. And when they captured it, he wired the Servitor into the fortress's Vox system, and he made the Servitor broadcast a non-stop, loud as hell Imperial chant. And it was echoing non-stop in the hives and all the Vox systems in the planet. When Imperial reinforcements finally came, a lot of people on both sides of the fight had gone crazy from the chanting. Anyway, the Imperium got the planet back, and that's everything that matters, right? Onto the Servitor. The Zenithal didn't really give me much of an edge when painting the skull, and this model is even darker, so I painted mostly everything black. The post that he is in has a lot of hard to reach areas that I want to tackle first, so that I don't need to poke around later and mess things up. I gave the cables a red base coat, and while I had the red out, I painted his bracelet too. The face is really hidden behind his Vox speaker, so I painted the skin next. Cadian flesh tone all over, then a wash of Reichland flesh shade, and highlights with rock art flesh. I felt like I rushed the skin a bit, and I wasn't really happy with it, so I played around with these colors off camera to blend the highlights better. The Servitor kind of reminds me of an assassin, so I thought a dark blue body glove would fit well. I left the cracks between the muscles black and added more and more gray to the parts that light would hit. Then I started mixing more and more blue to the gray and highlighted further with that. The highest points I straight up painted blue. Then I glazed a bit of black on some parts I thought I went a bit overboard with. I used the same black glaze to add a shadow to the red wrist. The bronze part on this mini were really similar to the ones on the Servo skull, so I kinda just copied what I did before. Dark brown, medium brown, and into the yellows for brightest highlights. I also tried painting bronze on his xenomorph type head, but midway through I figured I wanted red for a pop of color, so I painted over it. Then for the steel parts. They're big on this guy, and there are so many different shapes. I was really dreading these next steps, but I just started doing it. Slow and steady. I used the same paints as before. Black, dark blue-green and light gray. And just mixed them around. First I mixed black with the dark blue-green and gave everything except the deepest gaps a coat. Then I did the same thing but a bit more selectively with just the dark blue-green. That's gonna act as the base for the darker reflections. Then I mixed the black with light gray. I did 2 mixes of grays on my palette, a lighter one and a darker one. The cylinder on his backpack, his head and most of all his thighs gave me a really hard time. I really had to start focusing and figuring out where the light would bounce from. I used the darker gray for highlights in places that were not directly hit by sunlight, and the brighter gray for highlights on the more upward facing panels. As I got to the lighter tones, I really struggled at first, but by messing up enough, I started to notice what worked and what didn't. Light reflections work very different on shiny surfaces. They're not really on top, but rather the angle changes kind of following the viewer. That's at least in theory, but it's really hard to execute on a model that you can look at from any angle. When I had the reflections sorted out, I made the main ones brighter with just the light gray. I also added edge highlights everywhere. Between every step, I kept blacklining and reinforcing the shadows with thinned down black paint, so that it was easier to see what was going on. The legs and the small bits were a lot easier to get looking like something. There isn't much room for any reflections, so enough contrast and bright edge highlights did the trick. Lastly, on the metals were pure white highlights to make them really pop. I painted thin white edge highlights to all the most prominent edges, rivets and reflections. I think that's what really brought it to life. After the metals were done, only fun stuff remained. The only thing I left primer gray was the vacuum hoses hanging out of his backpack. I painted over it with a thinned down black speed paint. Then for some pops of color. I used my brightest yellow for his little lamp on front, the cable on the back of his head, and the cable from his wrist to his weird finger dagger. I had dropped this guy on the floor more than once at this point, and the finger had broken off. Instead of hiding the seam left from gluing, I decided to leave it black and even gave it a little highlight so that it looks like something that holds the cable in place. To make the reds pop, I went over them with a quick highlight of Mephiston red and then some Evil Sunz scarlet. Lovely bunch of vibrant reds that I keep using almost every time. I also painted the few buttons and lights he has here and there. Some with red, some with green. Lastly, some bright red highlights on the bottom of his eye lenses and a white dot on top. And this guy is done. I'm really happy how these servitors turned out. The big metal areas felt really overwhelming at first, but taking it one step at a time and just trying things out was the way to go. While they are not perfect, I think I learned a lot, and now I can pour all that experience into the Inquisitor himself. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I'm gonna make the Inquisitor a video of his own because this one is getting kinda long. It's gonna come out next week, so stay tuned for that. And if you're watching this in the future, well, you can go watch it right now. I'm gonna combine everything that I learned and I'm gonna paint my best miniature I've ever painted so far, so I'm really excited to share it with you guys. It's important to please the 5th Chaos God, the YouTube algorithm, so comments, likes, subscribes, they help YouTube to know that this video is worth watching, and it's gonna recommend it to more people, so it's gonna help the channel grow. The channel is almost at 500 subscribers. I've heard that the first 1,000 subscribers is the hardest to get, so I'm really happy with the progress. I hope that you'll join me next time. Until then, I'm gonna keep painting my minis, you paint yours, and thanks for watching.